like my garbage truck.
Welcome to our trash revolution.
Welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk or David Schuster with you guys the day before the most uncertain election of our lifetimes, live from the Polymarket Studios. David, this is crazy. I have never seen an election not just this close, but this unpredictable. Thoughts?
I hate to rain on your parade, Cenk. You know I love you, but I have a feeling this is actually not going to be close and that all of the polls are going to be proven dead wrong. And we'll get into that in a moment. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence and also some hard evidence that suggests women are turning out in far greater numbers than anybody had anticipated. And if that's true, then all the pre-election polls were off.
Okay, so can't wait is my answer to that. So we've got a hell of a show for you guys. All the things that I promised over the weekend. We've got the latest polls. We have the Epstein tapes of how close of friends they were with Donald Trump. We've got all the madness of Tucker Carlson now coming out and saying that the horses are causing hurricanes. Maximum madness the day before. And then in the bonus episode, I begin the populist revolt. 12 people have already joined me, so it's nearly complete. We'll explain what we're going to do after the election, no matter who wins. Perfect time to be a member. Hit that beautiful join button or tyt.com/2024. All right, David, let's get to it then.
Bombshell, earthquake. Bombshell, earthquake, tsunami. That is how the US political world is describing a staggering poll that came out over the weekend in Iowa, a red state. The survey for the Des Moines Register by respected pollster Ann Seltzer prompted this headline. Iowa poll, Kamala Harris leapfrogs Donald Trump to take lead near election day. Here's how. A new Des Moines Register Mediacom Iowa poll shows Vice President Harris leading former President Trump 47 to 44% among likely voters just days before a high-stakes election that appears deadlocked in key battleground states. The results follow September Iowa poll that showed Trump with a 4-point lead over Harris and a June Iowa poll showing him with an 18-point lead over Democrat President Joe Biden, who was a presumptive Democratic nominee at the time. Ann Seltzer, who put together this poll, she then went on television a lot, and she explained the 47-44 margin for Harris this way.
Digging into the data, we determined that it wasn't people switching positions. It was new people, perhaps a bigger pool of people, deciding to vote. And at that time, our definition of a likely voter was somebody who tells us they will definitely vote. And the numbers were especially notable among older people, among women, and among college graduates. These are all groups that are tilting toward Harris. So it seemed like there was a get off the bench moment.
A separate poll conducted by Emerson finds that Donald Trump is ahead in Iowa by 10. So what's the difference? Well, Ann Seltzer said that Emerson, and she kind of rained on Emerson in another media appearance, Emerson started with their assumptions and started with a model about what the turnout would be for various demographic groups, including women and older voters. Seltzer said she, by contrast, surveyed that to come up with her model about what the demographics and the participation would be in the election. So women are breaking for Harris by double digits, according to Seltzer. And even if double digit is the lead that Donald Trump has with men in Iowa, because women are coming in as a much larger percentage of the electorate, 55, 56%, that helps explain why Harris, according to Seltzer, is winning Iowa, state that Donald Trump is supposed to win. Now, Ann Seltzer's survey has caused heartache and heartburn for MAGA world because, again, if women are turning in higher percentages for Harris and they're a higher percentage of the electorate, then the pre-election polls, most of the polls are wrong. And according to the latest New York Times Siena poll, late deciders are coming in 55% for Harris, 44% for Trump. And the 8% of the electorate, this is what 8% of the electorate makes up the decision late. Again, they're breaking for Harris by you're looking at it 11 points. The polling comes as more than 70 million Americans have already voted, according to the University of Florida Election Lab. Roughly 40% of those surveyed by the Times CNN poll across the 7 battleground states said they had already voted. Harris wins those voters by a margin of 8 percentage points, the polls found. Trump has an edge among voters who say they are highly likely to vote, but have not yet cast a ballot. So the question is, will the voters who have yet to cast a ballot, will they be able to erase the margins for Trump that Harris has already accumulated? In other words, will more Trump voters show up on election day? And usually that's the case based on 2020 and also 2016, is that early voters favor the Democrats, late voters favor the Republicans. But will Donald Trump be able to run up his numbers in enough of these states on election day to make up what appears to be a Harris lead? And some interesting information about early voting. In North Carolina, for example, the election already has 59% voter participation before election day. In 2020, the overall participation in North Carolina was 72%. There was also something like 16 to 17% of the electorate that voted on election day. So again, the question becomes, what percentage is voting on election day? Does that number still withstand the Harris lead, or is it something that turns the numbers back around towards Donald Trump? According to a number of, now back to the Iowa poll, because according to a number of strategists, it's more than just Iowa that is at stake if, in fact, Ann Seltzer is correct. If she is correct, and women are a larger part of the electorate, and there's a greater percentage of older voters that are polling for Harris than for Donald Trump, well, that could have an impact not just in Iowa, but in a lot of other states as well. And in fact, in Kansas, there's a poll that shows Donald Trump won Kansas by 14 points in 2020. He's only ahead of Kamala Harris by 4. So there is a suggestion here that perhaps Ann Seltzer is onto something, and that has led to some remarkable pronouncements by some former Republican strategists, including Mark McKinnon on CNN.
She's been the most reliable pollster that I've ever worked with in my career, and I've worked with a lot of them. So if directionally she's right, and Trump just wins Iowa by a lot less than we thought he was going to, that just has huge consequences for the actual swing states. So again, I think if Seltzer's half right about Iowa, I think Harris could win all 7 swing states. So I'll just say it now. I know you're not in the prediction business, but I'm getting in it. Harris is going to blow the doors off. And it's going to be because of women and the Granny Gap.
Because of women and the Granny Gap. And of course, it could apply not just to Iowa, but also to Wisconsin and Michigan and other Midwestern battleground states. And by the way, I mentioned Kansas a moment ago. Kansas was one of those states that had an abortion ballot that was essentially up for a referendum to try to further restrict abortion after the Supreme Court Dobbs decision. That was rejected by the voters. They rejected the abortion restrictions. Abortion restrictions have been defeated in every state where they've been on the ballot. So even Republican states, women have come out and said, no, we're not going to have this, and they voted against it. Also, in special elections, for the last 2 years since the Supreme Court Dobbs decision, Democrats have outperformed in congressional elections and special elections and state and local elections that they were expected to lose or be close. They have outperformed the pre-election polling and the expectations, which suggests that women are a bigger part of this electorate than they would have been had it not been for the Supreme Court decision 2 years ago. Now, there's one other thing to keep in mind in all of this. We talk about overperforming compared to the polls. Somebody else who has overperformed repeatedly in his elections, Donald Trump. He was expected to lose some of these battleground states to Joe Biden by much greater margins than he actually did. And so the lingering question out there is, are there enough people out there who do not want to admit to pollsters and surveys that, yes, they're pulling the lever for Donald Trump? Will that number essentially mean that Donald Trump's expected final result will be higher than the polls suggest? And we will soon find out. Jack?
Okay, I've got even more information that's late breaking in a second for you guys. But first, let me begin to break this down. This election is not necessarily going to be the closest. There's been some unbelievably close elections. Obviously, 2000 Bush v. Gore, separated by a couple hundred votes in Florida, and then 43,000 votes in the 3 swing states in the last election made the difference. So I don't know that this is going to be the closest. In fact, at the end of the day, as David's pointing out, it might not even be that close, especially in the Electoral College. But what it is the most unpredictable election of my lifetime. It's for the 2 reasons that David explained there. So in 2016 and 2020, Donald Trump got all of these unexpected voters, and even in the states that Joe Biden won, Michigan and Wisconsin, for example, he had around an 8-point lead and barely wound up winning them by about 0.6. So tons of unexpected voters came in for Donald Trump. And I've explained that phenomenon for the last 8 years. No one in mainstream media wants to hear it, and they still don't understand it. It's people who don't normally vote going, oh, there's someone that's against the system? Well, I hate this system. I'm gonna show up and vote for that guy. Now, I think, of course, Donald Trump's a fake populist. You've heard me say that a million times, but that is what's driving them. On the other hand, in 2022 and 23, a ton of unexpected women voters showed up, and the Democrats did better than expected, which hadn't happened in a long time. So what we're in is a battle of unexpected voters. Which side is going to have more unexpected voters? So when we look at that, well, a couple of data points that David just shared with you stick out to me as the most relevant. The late deciders breaking 11% in favor of Kamala Harris is a big deal, because now we're no longer talking about polling and the assumptions that those different pollsters make when it comes to their polling. Now we're talking about actual votes, right? And if she's winning by 11% in people who actually voted already, well, that's a big deal. Oh, and especially because in that category, they hadn't made up their mind until very recently. So they're breaking towards her. We're not talking about the people who are already on the two different sides. So score one for her on that. And then to me, North Carolina was really interesting because Kamala Harris's team pulled out a lot of their ads from North Carolina around a week ago, even less. And that seemed to be signaling surrender there, as that they had lost. And the polling was trending towards Donald Trump in North Carolina. It looked like he was going to put it away. But now, over 50% of the vote is already in. And you know, on election nights, we'll tell you, as the percentage of the vote gets higher, it becomes so much harder for the other side to overcome a lead, because let's say it's 50% of the vote is in and Kamala Harris is up by 8, which is actually the situation in North Carolina, we believe so far based on the information that we have. It's not at all definitive, guys. So if that's true, then Donald Trump would have to win the other 50% by more than 8 points to bring it back to a tie, and then to be able to take the lead, right? So that's a lot of votes to make up. And so I think that if those numbers are true, that's super hard for them to make up. On the other hand, here's a new data point. John Ralston is the most respected reporter in Vegas. He's been covering these elections for a long time. He's been right about a lot of the election results. He kept talking about rural voters coming in at much larger numbers than they normally do in Nevada elections, and that was leaning towards Trump. So he was giving signals throughout that Nevada was headed towards Trump. But here at the last day, he turned around and said, no, based on what he's seeing recently and his intuition and all the other things that go into it, he believes that Kamala Harris is going to pull out Nevada barely by like 0.3% or so. So the two most important demographic groups are both women. It's just two different kinds of women. So one is independent women that are now coming in that Seltzer poll in Iowa at 2-to-1 margin for Kamala Harris. Remember, this is not Democratic women, this is independent women. And now independents outnumber Republicans and Democrats in the country. So which way independents break is super relevant. The late deciders going to Kamala Harris, independent women going to Kamala Harris in giant numbers. And then the last one is potentially the most important, senior women. So that is why Caitlin Collins on CNN reporting that those Iowa numbers came in like a gut punch to the Trump team, because if they're losing senior white women in the numbers that they're losing them in Iowa, if that poll is accurate, oh boy, then they're in a lot of trouble. And they're bleeding out senior voters in ways that people didn't expect. Meanwhile, this election is so topsy-turvy. We're in the middle of a transition. The parties are transitioning, the voters are transitioning. So Trump is picking up a lot more younger voters who are frustrated with the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris and the inability of Democrats to ever get anything done. On the other hand, the Democrats are picking up a lot of senior voters who are worried about Donald Trump's instability and his attacks on the Constitution and democracy. So at the end of all of that, with now less than a day to go, I'm at, I don't know. And I think that everybody should be at, I don't know. I think both sides are overconfident. Those unexpected voters from Trump can still show up, just like they did in the last 2 presidential elections. And those unexpected women voters are already showing up. And the question is, to what degree does that cavalry arrive? Is it a normal size election, a little bit more than normal, or do they show up in giant numbers? And so, David,
Jack, I'm so glad you mentioned.
Yeah, that brings me back to
younger voters.
It's so hard
one
to
of
know, but yeah, what's your sense of it?
I was going to say, Jack, I'm so glad you mentioned younger voters, because one of the things that Ann Seltzer pointed out is that the share of the Iowa electorate, when you look at older voters and younger voters, was much more sort of weighted, she found, towards older voters. People over 65 were turning out in a greater participation than a lot of people had thought, and people who are younger voters, 25 and younger, were turning out a much less number than a lot of people had thought. And if you go through some of the pre-election polls that have been done over the last couple of weeks, especially, so there's that in Iowa. If you go over the pre-election polls, especially some of the Republican paid-for polls that are out there that, in my view, are not scientific or statistically significant in the least, but a lot of them used a model that suggested, okay, we'll take the number from 2020 that will have women will be something like 53, 54% of the electorate. Okay, that's fine, except that in some of these battleground states, North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin not so much, but Michigan, you're looking at numbers of 55, 56% women in terms of the overall makeup of the election. And so when you have that 1 to 2 percentage point difference in terms of the overall participation, and you have a larger pool of women, and you already have women who are voting for Harris over Trump, as you said, by 15, 20 points, that's where the difference becomes. And that is, there's not enough male voters, even if they're supporting Donald Trump in the same way that women are supporting Kamala Harris, there's just not enough men to make up that gap. And then likewise, you add to the mix, if people over 65 are breaking for Harris in the way that they're breaking in Iowa, and you don't have the younger turnout that a lot of these pre-election polls suggested, then that means these pre-election polls were wrong. And I think the other piece about it is, we know there are some of these pre-election polls that were done by Republicans that were part of a strategy by the Trump campaign to be able to say, look, the election was stolen if I lost, because look at the pre-election polls. I was winning all these states. There's no way I could have lost unless the Democrats stole it. And I think there are some organizations, some fly-by-night organizations, that decided to participate in this and to essentially cook the books to try to help Donald Trump and perhaps give more enthusiasm to Republicans and depress Democrats. But that also fed into the narrative, because the mainstream news organizations that did essentially a polling average, they included all the numbers. They included every poll in terms of their, Real Clear Politics average of the polling for the states and nationally. And so it had the effect of some of these Trump favoring polls tightening the race and making it seem much closer than it might otherwise have been. So I think, to your point, it's a sort of a chaos election. Nobody really knows, but at least in terms of likely voters who's showing up, the numbers are not matching what some of these pre-election polls had been counting on. And I think that's why you're seeing so much enthusiasm for Kamala Harris and a sense of dread developing in the Trump campaign.
Yeah, so tomorrow our election coverage starts at noon Eastern. Don't miss a minute of it. It's going to be amazing. David's going to be part of Michael Schur, Anna Kasparian, John Iadarola, et cetera. And we're going to focus right at tyt.com. And at tyt.com, we'll also have all of the election news, all the exit polls, all the, hubbub around the long lines, the Republicans claiming fraud, et cetera. But I want to end on a couple of important things here. So to David's point about some of the nonsense polls in there, Real Clear Politics is a place that a lot of people go, but they included 2 nonsense Republican polls at a minimum, maybe 3. And so that skews their average, and that skews the way that people are looking at it. I try to ignore those as much as possible, but still at this late date, the very last polls that came in, most of them have Kamala Harris winning the election overall. But New York Times, CNN, and there's 2 buts there. One is they're all over the place. Some have her holding the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and others, but losing Nevada and Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia. Others have her winning Wisconsin and Michigan and Arizona and North Carolina, but not Pennsylvania. So, and they're all over the place. Every poll has different states going to different people. Kamala Harris is winning almost all of them that are not like weirdo jerry-rigged Republican polls. But New York Times Siena poll comes in at the end. She wins overall, but she's tied in Pennsylvania and Michigan. Well, if she doesn't win Pennsylvania and Michigan, she's not going to win. So that leaves us at, it is near impossible to tell. One last thing, the national average has them close. See, that doesn't make any sense either, because if you're close nationally, then the Republican candidate is much, much, much more likely to win. But yet, when you look at the swing states, they're not matching any of the old patterns. And what ultimately decides it is state by state, so the swing states will make all the difference. So that leaves Nate Silver, Frank Luntz, Harry Enton, and myself, for whatever it's worth, all at I don't know, and neither does anyone else. Okay, the people who are usually the most certain are the least certain in this election. But David, it seemed like you might be more certain. Well, I'll give you one thing I am certain about, and then I'm curious about your opinion. Rena Thea on Twitch, one of our members there, wrote in, "Women might save you all." Well, that's definitely true, because if Kamala Harris wins, it will definitely be because the cavalry arrived, and that cavalry is female voters in larger numbers than expected. So that part is clear, but we don't know that that's definitely going to happen, or maybe the Trump voters overwhelm, etc. So if she wins, it's because of women voters, but I don't know at this late date whether she's going to win. David, you sounded more confident before we came on air. What's your take?
Yeah, I'm going to go out. I don't think it's so much of a limb, because look, I make this decision in part based on what I've seen in some of the crosstabs and some of the percentages of people who have already voted, the way the numbers are coming in. I do think that women, as a percentage of this electorate, it's coming in higher by a percentage point or two than nearly all the pre-election polls. So that favors Kamala Harris. The other part is, if you look back at the last 2 years, every single election, Democrats have outperformed the pre-election polling. Ballot initiatives, special elections, mayoral races. There was a race in Anchorage, Alaska, Republican town that Donald Trump carried by 14 points. This year, the Democrat won by 12. I mean, there just feels like there is this wave of participants that have not previously been counted as likely voters. So my sense, and maybe it's going on a limb, maybe it's overconfidence, maybe it's partly wishful thinking, but my gut tells me that that the polling is wrong, that there's a greater participation of women than anybody had anticipated, that younger voters are not going to turn out for Donald Trump in the way they had been counting on, and that yes, senior voters are breaking harder for Trump. And remember, in the course of 4 years, you get a cohort of 5 or 6 million senior voters who are not voting anymore because they're dead or they're incapacitated. So there's a group that, essentially reshuffles in terms of the older cohort. So to put it bluntly, I think she is going to win 6 of the 7 battleground states. I think some of them will be very close. Nevada and Arizona, very tight. I think North Carolina and Georgia could be tight. Pennsylvania could be tight. But I think you'll have a couple of them that she'll win by 50 or 60,000 votes. And I'm pretty confident, and I know this may be an outlier. I think that by midnight Eastern time on election night, we're going to know that Kamala Harris has won this election. And the only thing that's left is certification and making sure that the ballots are official. But I just think that there are going to be so many states that she's going to win, battleground states, that it's going to be over on election night. That's where I feel it's going.
Okay, strong statement. I like it. At noon Eastern tomorrow on election day, when we start our coverage on TYT.com, I will be forced to make a prediction, and I will. And we're going to ask you guys, our viewers, to make predictions, and whoever is the most accurate will be declared the election champion of the world. Now, what does that mean? Nothing outside of you being election champion of the world, but you'll get to brag about it for the rest of the time, that you were the one person who knew best. So that's what we're going to try to determine.
And Jeng, I'm going to add some fun. If I'm wrong, if she does not win 6 of 7 battleground states, suppose she only wins 2 or 3 and it's tight, or she loses the election, I will come back on TYT and I will literally eat this paper that I've written some of my data on. I will eat it on live TYT. I will humiliate myself. I will shame myself. I will apologize. I will say, never believe Schuster again. He's wrong. He's an idiot. He's a moron. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think she's going to win, and it's going to be a blowout.
I like how strong David's coming in. It's usually my move. Mike, in this case, I'm not at all sure, but David seems very sure. I'm so curious to see if that's going to turn out to be true. I can't wait. So I hope we see you all on election day and see how it actually turns out. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. Let's see. We got so much more election news for you guys, including Donald Trump's wild new threats when we return. All right, guys. So first of all, like I said, make sure you're checking us out tomorrow. We're going to declare election champion of the world. I'm serious about that. Not that it means anything. Not that it itself is serious, but we are going to do that. And obviously, we're going to have wall-to-wall coverage. We're going to have all the data, so you don't need to go anywhere else. We're going to have some fun games, like I said, and then we're going to try to start a populist revolt. But that starts tonight in the members-only episode for you guys. We also have a bunch of great new shirts. I was bragging about the Oaklandish collabo. Here we go. This one, vote, love it. Okay, and this one you could wear the polling stations because it just says vote like the bumper sticker. It doesn't say who. The back has the Oaklandish and TYT logos. Super cool brand. Really be happy to be involved with them. Here, I'm holding all these up because Anna tells me not to wear the shirts on air. This is our the scales of justice. I love that. I have a Trump fired one. I can't show it because we don't want to jinx anything. But if Trump does get fired by the American people again, we've got 2 of those shirts on shoptyt.com, but we're not showing it. And then Imran Sheikh's great vote shirt with the Supreme Court on the line. And by the way, this shirt turns out to be, of course, prescient, because if Kamala Harris wins, it appears, as David and I were talking about in the last segment, it will almost certainly because Republicans took women's rights away. So if you're a Republican and you want to cry about it, well, how about next time you don't take women's rights away? Lesson learned, but that hasn't happened yet. So there might be a lot of lessons tomorrow. Just don't know which ones. So, okay, you're checking us out. Oh, by the way, on shoptyt.com, if you have an order that's over $200, free shipping, okay? All right, so let's go to our members at tyt.com. Patience says, ooh, it's finally here. I can't wait to roll into my polling place and vote at 7 a.m. Yeah, I like to vote day of too. That doesn't make me a Trump supporter. He does get more day of voters because of how much crap he talked about mail-in voting. Although now they're panicking and saying, please mail in all your votes. So I'm going to vote tomorrow as well. Over 9,000 says, it was the night before the election and all through the country, the people were hopeful to say bye to the orange monkey. Man, if he wins and we got to go through 4 more years of chaos, it's just exhausting thinking about it. We'll get to the RFK Jr. canceling vaccines in a minute, et cetera. I don't want to go through all that. The establishment's a machine we can fight, and we can fight together. Asimov's prophet says, I believe we are safe on January 21st. Hope so. Stiff Upper Lib says, the part that gets me is that I keep hearing that election is so close, but Donnie and the Repubs keep acting like they're losing, a kind of weird dynamic. Well, yes and no. They acted like they were winning throughout the entire time. They were so overconfident. But in the last 3 to 4 days, they have been in a panic. And they're all screaming rigged, fraud, et cetera. You don't do that if you think you're going to win. But on the other hand, Donald Trump cries over everything, so you never know. We'll be back. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and David with you guys. Make sure you're checking out David on Rebel Headquarters. Rebel Headquarters is a great channel that TYT has. Tons of our hosts are on there, so definitely check that out when you get a chance on YouTube. Hubcaps, thank you for the wonderful donation through tyt.com/2024. Guys, that is super important to us. We're trying to raise $100,000 through the election. We definitely need it. We wouldn't ask if we didn't need it. And we're trying to make this, this year our last ask. I mean, 222, I hope so, because we got to stay in business here as we go along, and it's been super hard times in media. So tyt.com/2024. And then on YouTube, Mika Peabody, Michael Flanagan, Christian Emery, thank you so much, guys, for joining. They hit that gorgeous join button below. Gabby Mathis gifted 5, and Dawn Whitehead gifted 1 membership on YouTube too. You guys are all amazing. We love our audience. David.
Well, Jenka, Donald Trump seems to keep inciting violence. Watch.
I have a piece of glass over here, and I don't have a piece of glass there, and I have this piece of glass here, but all we have really over here is the fake news, right? And to get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news, and I don't mind that so much, because I don't mind.
As we get closer and closer to that moment when the ballots actually start getting counted, Donald Trump keeps ramping up his very dangerous rhetoric, this time inciting violence against the press. This was his Pennsylvania rally on Sunday. He said he would not mind if somebody shot through the press to get to him. As usual, Trump's team is trying to engage in some damage control, this time putting a truly bizarre spin on Trump's comments. Trump campaign spokesperson Stephen Chung said in a statement, "The president's statement about protective glass placement has nothing to do with the media being harmed or anything else. It was about threats against him that were spurred on by dangerous rhetoric from Democrats. In fact, President Trump was stating that the media was in danger and that they were protecting him and therefore were in great danger themselves and should have had a glass protective shield also. There can be no other interpretation of what was said. He was actually looking out for their welfare, for more than his own, far more than his own." Wow. In addition to making light about violence against the press, Trump also made this concerning comment during the rally. Watch.
We had the best economy ever. We had the wall. We had everything. I built over 500 miles of wall. They don't even talk about the wall. But we had the best border, the safest border. I won't pull down my world's favorite chart because I don't want to waste a lot of your time. But my world's favorite chart, done by the Border Patrol, it said we had the safest border in the history of our country the day that I left. I shouldn't have left. I mean, honestly, because we did so well.
He shouldn't have left. And there's your admission from Donald Trump about his desire to stay in office just 2 days before the election. And Jenk, one other thing that has happened on this day, Donald Trump made a remark where he talked about inviting Mike Tyson, that maybe Mike Tyson should get in a ring with Kamala Harris, suggesting that he would like to see Kamala Harris punched in the face. It's bizarre. Jenk?
Yeah, I mean, he's mainly punching himself in the face by doing this rhetorically and in the elections. When you are trying to win an election where there's going to be, it appears, record voter turnout from women, to constantly be talking about attacking women is not a great idea. And so I'm going to protect them whether they like it or not a good look, right? And now talking about putting her in the ring with Mike Tyson makes you sound like you're a wife beater, which, by the way, according to his ex-wife Ivana, he is. And you allow people to bring back all of those stories of all the different sexual assaults and domestic assault, etc., that has haunted Donald Trump in the past. Now, no smart candidate would say things like that, but Donald Trump, as we all know, is not a very stable genius. He's a very, very unstable person. That's why he says ludicrous things that cost him tons of votes before the election. That brings us to the media thing. Look, guys, I get that he had a joking tenor to that conversation, but after they all yelled at us and everyone involved, Democrats, media, the MAGA and Trump did, like, oh my God, you guys said mean things about Donald Trump. And some of them were such insults that we think that it might have led to people taking a shot at him. So you all have to bring down your violence. I remember Piers Morgan yelling at me for about 20 minutes straight about, oh my God, the Democrats have such terrible violent rhetoric. And you can't say the democracy's on the line. If you say democracy's on the line, that means he's a fascist. That means he's like Hitler. That means somebody should, like 8 different steps, right? Here, there's no extra steps. He says they'll have to shoot through the media, which I wouldn't mind. So what happened to being outraged by violent rhetoric? I guarantee you, Piers Morgan, MAGA, Trump world will not be outraged by it at all because they feel that they are entitled to say things like that, but no one is allowed to say anything back. I don't want either side doing any violent rhetoric. It's a really dumb idea, and for Trump to do it, well, he could say he was joking, but so was the comedian who called Puerto Rico garbage. How's that working out for you guys? Again, if you're a Republican, you should be 10,000 times angrier at Donald Trump than we are because he's costing you the election. None of this makes anybody at home who is undecided go, you know what? Trump's not joking around about shooting the media. That makes me think that he's really stable, and that's the guy we got to go back to. I bet we won't have 4 years of anarchy as he calls out enemy from within and how people he doesn't like are criminals and rapists, and should we use the military to shoot them? And the media, haha, wouldn't it be funny if they were shot? So please spare me any fake outrage about what any Democrat says after Trump says all of this.
Well, the irony of this, Cenk, is that also, I mean, there's already sort of a blame game that's sort of being, by both campaigns. If Harris loses, they've already tried to figure out, who's going to be responsible to blame Joe Biden. If Donald Trump loses, some of his people are already saying it's Donald Trump's fault. And I think there's actually some merit to the argument that Donald Trump's campaign has actually been fairly disciplined. If you look at the speeches, just the part that is actually supposed to be on the prompter, not the ad-libbing, he's constantly supposed to be focused on inflation. Whether inflation is up or down is irrelevant. He claims it's the record inflation. Immigration, that we have a swarm coming in, that violence is up, even though that's not true. But the campaign itself has been very disciplined in trying to get voters to focus just on that. And if you look at the advertisements, the ads are fairly effective in drumming home those messages. But what Donald Trump, who's always been undisciplined and always likes to sort of ramble, has been doing for the last several weeks is constantly stepping on the campaign message. And it's, I guess there was a time 4 years ago, maybe even 8 years ago, where Donald Trump's ramblings had a little more bite to the curveball. He hadn't quite lost a step yet. And so I suppose there was a sense of humor when Donald Trump would sort of go off the cuff and very charismatic, and he would engage voters and they loved it. But now Donald Trump is old. He's lost a few steps. He's slower. And some of his comments just don't make any sense. And at a campaign where discipline really, it would be crucial for Donald Trump if he's going to win this thing, he's his own worst enemy by constantly reminding people of things they don't like about him and constantly energizing women, older voters, people who care about democracy, people who don't like wife beating. I mean, Donald Trump is essentially checking all the boxes for essentially getting out the vote for Democrats.
Yeah, and two more things from what we just discussed. Him saying that I shouldn't have left. Like, what is that? Like, okay, hey, I wish I had won, we would have had a better 4 years, perfectly fine. Of course, that's totally fine, right? I shouldn't have left. Well, brother, that's how losing an election works. You leave. If you say I lost the election, which he knows he did, and you don't leave, that's a problem. In fact, that's the number one reason why seniors are switching over to Kamala Harris is because this guy says he won't leave. But this idiot doesn't realize that, and he's like, oh, I got a great idea. I'll tell him everything is rigged, and I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to accept any defeat. I mean, they asked him a simple question during the debates. Are you in favor of a peaceful transfer of power? He's like, well, it depends. No, it doesn't depend. The peaceful transfer of power is at the very end, after all the counts and recounts, etc. So if you've gotten all your recounts and you've gotten all your court cases, it doesn't depend. You need a peaceful transfer of power. That's why we talk about how he's a wannabe dictator, etc. Because he doesn't understand the simple concept of if you lose, you leave. And so this guy, look, the mainstream media uses the word disqualifying way too often. They'll drop it at the at any mention of a thing that they don't like. But not leaving after you lose an election and encouraging a riot where they chanted about killing your vice president and you saying he deserved it to your chief of staff and talking about terminating the Constitution. Yeah, those are reasons why people say, I think it is disqualifying. What if we put you back in and you don't leave? Finally, we'll end on a funny note because David read you Stephen Chung's comment about the rally comment about shooting at the media. He said that Trump was just looking out for their welfare, the media's, more than his own. Except you heard him say, well, they'd have to shoot through the media, and I don't think I'd mind that. How is that looking out for theirs? So that's my point, guys. Whether it's Trump or all the people around him, they don't mind lying to you brazenly and rubbing your face in it. Yeah, he said, well, shoot the media, I don't mind, whether it was joking or not. And I'm going to now pretend that he meant protect the media. Well, okay, why don't you just hang a giant sign around your neck saying, I'm a giant liar, you should never trust anything that comes out of the Trump campaign.
Well, the lies that keep coming, Cenk, now again about fraud. We talked about, of course, what Donald Trump made the big lie in 2020. Well, it does seem like he's sort of greasing the runway for 2024 claims of election fraud. Here's what Donald Trump just said. Watch.
But they found, as I understand it, I mean, I don't know what's happened in the last day or so, but in Lancaster, they found 2,600 ballots, all done and by the same hand. In other words, the same exact penmanship, the same hand, the same everything. It was all done by the same pen, the exact same pen.
The exact same pen, the exact same hand. That everything Donald Trump said there is a lie. In Pennsylvania, up to 2,500 voter registration applications, not ballots, were identified as potentially fraudulent. But of course, facts that never stopped Donald Trump from crying election fraud. And with the election day, of course, coming up very soon, it does look like we're in for many more lies from Trump and other Republicans. In fact, just this morning, Donald Trump Jr. said the following. Watch.
You know what they're going to try to do. We've seen this playbook before, but this time we're prepared. So if we win decisively tomorrow, you don't give them a week to find that magical truck filled with ballots, right? No one knows where they came from, but take back your country, America.
Take it back from magical ballots that are suddenly going to be trucked in. Well, on Steve Bannon's podcast, Tucker Carlson pushed the lie even further.
What I'm really struck by is how virtually every Trump voter I talk to, and maybe even some on the fence voters, says basically the same thing. You know, it's just a question of how much the Democratic Party cheats in this election, which is another way of saying the whole country seems to have accepted the reality that, you know, one of the two big political parties doesn't believe in democracy, is willing to cheat and ignore the will of the population, of the citizenry. That's really dark. As someone who spent, you know, I don't know, something like 15 hours in depositions imposed on me by voting machine companies. And I was never named in any suit by a voting machine company, but they went out of their way to harass me. I think funded by Reid Hoffman, stole all my text messages, leaked them to the New York Times. I'm bitter about it still. But for the last year and a half, the whole, conservative media has been cowed into ignoring what's really obvious, which is we should not have electronic voting machines. They don't work. They're not more efficient. They're not better at counting, and they don't produce the result faster. The only reason to have electronic voting machines is if, you want to subvert them.
Wow. Well, based on the claims from Donald Trump and his lackeys, including Jr. and Tucker Carlson, it seems like the writing is on the wall. If Trump loses this election, if he does anything but win, Donald Trump and his supporters are going to cry foul. And of course, Donald Trump's cronies are going to back it up. And a vast majority of Americans see this stunt coming. A majority of Americans, 70%, according to BBC, expect Trump to reject the result if he loses, according to a CNN SSRS poll released Monday. It's also worth noting that many of Donald Trump's fake electors from 2020 have returned for the 2024 election. Of the 93 Republicans designated as prospective presidential electors for Trump from the 7 battleground states. 8 are facing felony charges for signing false electoral college certificates in 2020, according to a political analysis. Another 5 signed similar certificates in 2020, but were not charged. And at least 6 others played notable roles in challenging the results of the 2020 election or promoting election conspiracy theories. All told, at least 1 in 5 prospective Trump electors from battleground states this year had some connection to the scheme to overturn the 2020 election. To make matters even worse, disinformation is running rampant on social media. Here's an example.
The FBI and the US intelligence officials now saying Russia is behind a fake video now circulating online showing a man who claims to be a Haitian immigrant who says he voted multiple times in Georgia. Again, the video is completely fake.
Man who says he's a Haitian immigrant claims to have voted multiple times in Georgia using multiple IDs.
So across the United States, a lot of election officials, Secretary of States, people who are in charge of elections are racing to try to debunk these fraudulent claims. Here's Pennsylvania's Secretary of the Commonwealth named Al Schmidt. He went on CNN to push back against Trump claims of voter fraud in his state of Pennsylvania.
I was a Republican election commissioner in Philadelphia, elected in 2011 and reelected in 2015 and reelected in 2019. I have investigated hundreds of allegations of voter fraud. And that's why I feel like I can speak with some degree of authority and knowledge about when it occurs and when it doesn't occur, and when it does occur, the extent to which there's evidence of it. And allegations of widespread voter fraud in Pennsylvania are completely and totally unfounded. Voters should have confidence that we will have a free, fair, safe, and secure election in 2024, just as we had in 2020.
But a lot of Americans are now going to face a choice. Do you believe some of these election officials, including Republicans who say that the elections are free and fair and safe, or do you believe Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. and Tucker Carlson and some of the other lackeys and minions who seem eager, Jack, to go ahead and promote this nonsense in order to somehow get Donald Trump back in power, even if it means lying about something that hasn't even happened yet? Truckloads of ballots are coming, says Don Jr. and Tucker Carlson. It's absolute nonsense. Jay?
Yeah. So 2 things that you mentioned that are one of them is important, the other one is hilarious. So I'll get back to that in a second. But to the core of the issue, you know, all the cases where we had the same handwriting in the registration applications and a couple other cases in some states. Why we know about them? Because they were caught. Oh, right, that's the system working. They seem to have forgotten that completely. The Democrats are rigging these elections. That's why the Democrats turned over fraudulent applications. Wait, what? So the Democrats and the Republicans caught different people trying to cheat on registration applications or maybe a couple of instances of ballots. Well, by definition, that's the system working. Okay, then how about the ones that are the hundreds of things out there that are unproven, okay? Well, first of all, some of those, might surprise you, some of those are not malicious. A lot of those are right-wingers who believe everything Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump and every liar in right-wing media tells them. And so they think that there's fraud everywhere. So they're like, oh, my neighbor voted for Kamala Harris. That's obviously fraud. No, that's not fraud. That's just your neighbor voting in a different way than you, right? Joe, yeah, what about this? What about that? Oh, Joe, she came in voting with a red shirt. I don't know what you're talking about, okay? So my favorite out of all those insane allegations is they got one guy on video. They're like, look at this guy dropping off all these ballots at a voting station. Who is he? Well, good news, they found out who he is. The mailman. Come on, guys. And this is exactly the nonsense horse crap that, or I should say mule crap, that Dinesh D'Souza did. And he put out that stupid movie, 2,000 Mules, and then the distributor of the movie then pulled it back later and said, sorry, it was filled with lies. Sorry, stop suing us. Yeah, it was totally a lie, right? So there's no, and then he would do the same stupid trick. He'd be like, look at this, ballots being moved. Yeah, by election workers. They have to count them at some point. That's how it works, right? And half those guys are Republicans. And half the votes that they counted for were Republicans. So, okay, all that is total nonsense by a crybaby, Donald Trump. Spoiled little brat. I don't want to go. I don't care that I lost. Daddy, give me my toy back, right? So, and that leads to the most important number that David read for you guys. That's 70%. 70% of the country thinks that Donald Trump is going to cry after the election if he loses. Cry and cry and cry and never admit that he lost. So some portion of those are Republicans who think, oh, good, that's what we do if we lose. We just cry forever, right? Or good people who genuinely believe, because of the lies that they've been told, that the election was stolen from them and that the Democrats are working with Soros and Chavez to steal all the elections, whatever, okay? So, but remember guys, a big portion of that giant number, 70%, are people who are gonna vote against Donald Trump because they hate his crying. They hate that when he loses an election, he won't leave. So it's a terrible strategy. And every advisor he has had has told Donald Trump, look, in the polling, it shows that when you keep insisting like a lunatic that you won the last election, the overwhelming majority of Americans do not believe you did, and it hurts you because you look ridiculous and insane. He's like, I don't care, I never lose. Daddy told me I never lose. I'm the only winner, me. Okay, well then lose the election like a moron, which is exactly what he's doing now. And the last part is the funny part. Did you notice what Tucker Carlson said? He had the conspiracy theory about Reid Hoffman. I don't know who got his text. I don't know how they got his text. I don't know, okay? But he's, oh yeah, this guy got my text. Oh, so those texts were real. Remember in the text, he talked about how much he hated Donald Trump's guts and how he thought he was a malignant force who should be avoided at all costs. So the texts were real, Tucker. But you're out here pretending that you're Donald Trump's best friend? Hilarious. Thank you for the admission. You hate him. There's no bigger actor in media than Tucker Carlson. Tons of right-wing media actually believe the stuff that they say. But Tucker Carlson doesn't believe a word of it, and he just confessed it to you guys while pretending to say all this lunatic stuff and pretending to be in favor of Donald Trump as he costs Donald Trump more and more votes as the election happens. All of a sudden, we're gonna show you one later today, the demon talk and how the demons are attacking. You know what that does? It turns off potential voters to Donald Trump because he doesn't want J.D. Vance to be the presumptive nominee. That's a longer conversation. We'll have it later in the show. All right. Yeah, David.
I was just going to say one other thing to sort of watch with all of this is there's already apparently a pressure campaign by the Trump campaign on some members of Congress basically saying, look, no matter what happens on Tuesday night when the votes come in, we don't want you going and supporting, declarations of Kamala Harris wins this state or that state. We don't want you saying anything or else. And I keep thinking, well, what's the or else? I mean, if Donald Trump loses this election, what leverage does he have over sitting members of Congress who say, no, I accept the results? Because Donald Trump is done. So it's sort of an interesting dynamic here that, sure, I can understand why, until every vote is counted, until it's official, and there are going to be voters on the West Coast, and you don't want to cost House seats on the West Coast by prematurely declaring, oh yeah, the election's over, Donald Trump has lost, Kamala Harris is going to be president. But on the other hand, it's not like Donald Trump has the sort of leverage that he might have had, say, 4 years ago, or certainly 8 years ago, in terms of pressuring members of Congress to go along with this nonsense.
Yeah, David, my only answer to that is that he will lie so many times that he'll get his base to be super angry at the Republican politicians that acknowledge reality. So they're gonna have to battle that base for a long time, even if Trump is gone. And the more Trump lies, the more they believe him, and the more they think that election was stolen, that everything is rigged and nothing is true. So that's an albatross around the Republican Party's neck for a long time. But hey, Democrats, don't get too smug. The establishment is the albatross around your neck and you don't even realize it. So we'll see what happens after the election. But one thing that would be nice is if everyone acknowledged objective reality. And though to the Democrats' credit, they generally do that. They might complain, oh, it wasn't our fault, it was Jill Stein, it was the Russians, it was this, it was that. But at the end of the day, they accept the results. but Donald Trump is a unique danger to democracy. He never accepts results if he loses. So that's why people are going to vote against him, because they think this guy cheats and doesn't really believe in our system of government. And I think they're right. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. We'll be right back. Let's go to Super Chat here. 00083 writes in, Cenk, you were right. I can't make heads or tails, but I think we need to focus on the unlikely voters, and they might turn this into a surprise blowout. That's true, but we don't know which direction they're going to be unexpected. In fact, they'll probably be in both directions. And then how does that play out? Well, we'll find out tomorrow. Michael Hill says, and by the way, don't forget, guys, noon tomorrow is when the show starts. We're going to go through damage report, indisputable, main show, and election coverage until the end of the night. Michael Hill writes in, they don't poll young people. Young people are going to come through. Florida will be closer than what people think. Michael, I'd be surprised by that if Florida was close. And remember, these days, younger people are a little bit more mixed. So if the Democrats ever delivered, which is a story we have a little bit later in the show, it would be mixed and it'd be a landslide. But here we are. Box writes in, 2 words for how I'm feeling right now: emotionally exhausted. Box, you speak for the country. Fabian TG, thank you for the donation through Super Chat, appreciate it. ST129 wrote in, if Kamala somehow wins Iowa, the Democrats will win the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Senate map would be the following: D51, R48, Independent 1, Dan Osborne. So hey, brother, save it for tomorrow. Become election champion of the world by whoever's the most accurate in predicting the Electoral College, the House, and the Senate gets declared champion of the election by TYT, the person who knew it the best. That's kind of fun. That's what we're going to play on the website tomorrow, tyt.com. The stream will be embedded on the website. You can watch through YouTube as well, but if you go on tyt.com, we'll have extra news for you guys, extra results, and extra games. Nicholas DePerno wrote in, my prediction is Harris holds the blue wall and wins 270 to 268. Also, Trump will declare victory no matter what, and if Harris loses, media blames Gaza protests. They can blame anything they like, man. I don't care what the stupid mainstream media thinks about, if, let's say she loses Michigan, and if they dare blame Arab or Muslim voters, I'm gonna, believe me, that I will counter that insanity. No, how about you, Kamala Harris, let alone Donald Trump? Be responsible for your own actions and for your own policy positions, and she didn't do nearly enough to win those votes. Not nearly enough. Trump is worse. He says Netanyahu can't wait for Trump to win. But it would have been nice if our candidate actually showed a tiny bit of humanity in that issue. Laura P. writes in YouTube member section, I'm a 54-year-old woman in rural South Alabama. I'm voting for Harris. I'm a blue dot, but my red girlfriends are also voting for Harris. Laura, that might be super relevant in the swing states. Frank Thorne says we need to make Election Day a paid federal holiday. Here, Frank, that's 100% right. Pineapple on Pizza says Kamala leaned on Republicans to get her the win. The Republicans will vote for her, but they'll also vote for a GOP Senate and House, rendering her politically impotent. Maybe, but the Senate candidates are doing better than Kamala Harris is, so God knows. But a bunch of them are losing in Montana, West Virginia, etc. And Comic Boom says, imagine that, America may not embrace insanity after all. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and David Schuster with you guys. Check out David on Rebel Headquarters on YouTube. You guys are going to love that. I want to thank a whole bunch of good people. Kerry Dragon Yaya, thank you for the gifted membership on YouTube. J Bomb Dragon and Mad Max Saturn, thank you for gifting 5. We appreciate you guys. Richard Monroe And Montego Bradley, thank you for joining through the join button below, American Heroes. And then some things be a dragon. I can't read it on air. Thank you for joining. We appreciate your sense of humor. Love all you guys. And then one last shout out to M. Bartnick, who also just became a member through tyt.com/2024. We appreciate all you guys. You allow us to do the most honest news program in the country and to fight for a little bit of positive change in the world. We're earnest like that, but that's what we do. And by the way, we're doing a state competition through Operation Hope as well. Go to tyt.com/hope to become a state captain if you want, or participate in that competition, let alone the election champion of the world that we'll be doing on the site as well tomorrow. All right, David, what's next?
Cenk, some interesting news from the Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu's office is in the throes of a scandal, and it's generating a growing controversy in Israel. Multiple suspects, including a close aide to the prime minister, are being detained for allegedly sharing and distorting classified information. The leak, seemingly unlawful, appears to have served Netanyahu's own interests and may have prevented a hostage deal with Hamas. So let's break it down. 2 months ago, Netanyahu said that Israeli troops had to control Gaza's border with Egypt, this is southern Gaza, to prevent Hamas from rearming and smuggling Israeli hostages that they took into Egypt. Well, many in Israeli security establishment dismissed the demand and accused Netanyahu of avoiding a deal to keep the war going. Yet within days, two journals, Germany's Bild and London's Jewish Chronicle, published articles based on documents that supported Netanyahu's point and suggested that Hamas was obstructing a deal. The reports centered on three documents. The first was Netanyahu presented the first in early September, the day after Hamas killed 6 Israeli hostages. Netanyahu said it was the outline of Hamas's strategy to use psychological warfare against the Israeli public. The second document reinforced Netanyahu's claim that then Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar would use an Israeli withdrawal from the Egyptian border to smuggle hostages to Egypt and Iran and possibly Yemen. A third was said to have been found on Sinwar's computer, laying out instructions on how to handle negotiations in a way that would lead to deadlock. Netanyahu referred to the document at a cabinet meeting after its publication and said, it reveals Hamas's plans to wage war until further notice, until Israel is defeated. Well, the validity of the reports based on these documents was almost immediately questioned, and it appears that some of the so-called evidence had been distorted. According to an Israeli newspaper, Israeli intelligence doesn't know who wrote the first document, which doesn't match the handwriting of any senior Hamas leader. The document allegedly from Sinwar had been manipulated to present Hamas's stand as more hawkish than it was, and was likely written by mid-level officials rather than Hamas leadership. The reports actually triggered a rare investigation accusing Israeli officials, including a Netanyahu aide, of leaking classified documents and exaggerating their significance. Until now, a judicial gag order had prevented most of the details, though, from being released. The judge in the case partially lifted the order on Friday, revealing a joint investigation by the Shin Bet, the Israeli police, and the IDF concerning a suspected breach of security involving the illegal distribution of classified information. A court order made public on Sunday said that information taken from Israel's military systems and illegally issued may have damaged Israel's ability to free hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. And it may have put Israeli intelligence sources in danger as well. 4 suspects were initially arrested for taking the intelligence and leaking it to the media, and 1 was released on Sunday. 2 of the 3 suspects are still in custody. They are defense intelligence and intelligence officials. The third is named Eli Feldstein, who served as an aide in the prime minister's office. Feldstein began working there a few days after the October 7th massacre, but actually failed a Shin Bet background and security check. Nonetheless, Feldstein took on the role of Bibi's spokesperson and was responsible for media relations along with some other folks. He was in Netanyahu's close circle and even attended classified meetings with Netanyahu. Of course, Netanyahu's office denies there have been any leaks. They say the investigation is part of a deep state witch hunt aimed at undermining him. Sounds familiar, right? Well, but Netanyahu's opponents in the Israeli government disagree. Opposition leader Yair Lapid on Sunday accused the prime minister's office of leaking fake secret documents to torpedo the possibility of a hostage deal to shape a public opinion, influence opposition against the hostages' families. They said it implied an active campaign to discredit them. The families of the hostage families said this implied an active campaign to discredit them, and the hostage families called it a moral low that has no depth, This is a fatal injury to the remnants of trust between the government and its citizens. The hostage families are calling the scandal one of the biggest deceptions in the history of Israel's government. Jack?
I'm a little confused by this. I want to ask you a question, David, because to me, leaking questionable intelligence is, I would say, Israel 101, but really any country, US 101, whenever the government wants to prove something. You know, whenever it's something that's against the government, America chases you to the end of the earth. Edward Snowden's still in Russia because he leaked things that were true and actually helped us make the correct decisions. But when government officials leak, there's no consequences at all. And questionable intelligence, that's what IDF puts out every other day. So what's going on here? Why is there a rebellion here within the Israeli government over this particular document?
Well, Cenk, it's being described as, remember before in the run up to the Gulf War, when there was Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell and others talking about, well, we don't want the smoking gun to be in the form of a mushroom cloud. And this, they essentially, it was like the alley-oop. They cherry picked intelligence, they put it out there on the Sunday shows, and then that essentially helped Dick Cheney and others slam it home to take the United States to war in Iraq. Well, in Israel, the stakes are somewhat similar in the sense that there's this effort by the prime minister's office, allegedly, to take some fake information to sort of throw it up there and then say, aha, this is why we can never have a hostage deal with Hamas, because Hamas does not want it. And while the issue, of course, in the Gulf War was the US essentially invading Iraq, in Israel, for the last several months, ever since it was clear that Israel had essentially dismantled Hamas, the number one concern, the greatest concern among Israelis has been, is there any way to get the hostages returned safely? And there has been this perception, and I think it's legitimate to a certain extent, that Netanyahu has not wanted to prioritize the hostages return. He has wanted to prioritize totally eradicating and pounding Hamas into dust, which, okay, maybe that's his military strategy, but these two things are sort of at odds with each other. And so you have Netanyahu, essentially his office, trying to say, look, there's no way we can get the hostages back because look at this intelligence evidence that we have, even though now it seems the intelligence evidence was false. And it makes a lot of Israelis, and particularly opposition leaders in Israel, of which there are many, wonder, well, has Netanyahu been deliberately sandbagging? The greatest concern that exists in Israel is that polls overwhelmingly show most Israelis, they would take a deal now, they would have taken a deal 6 months ago to end the war if they could have the hostages back. Netanyahu knows the polling, and what he's essentially been caught doing is trying to essentially manipulate the public to make it seem like, oh, there was no possible way that we could get the hostages back, so let's just continue bombing Hamas, when some of the information he was using was not only perhaps cherry-picked, but was simply wrong.
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised that people in Israel don't already universally know that Netanyahu has no interest in getting the hostages back. He's scuttled every peace deal himself. The Hamas agreed to a peace deal back in July 2nd, and then Netanyahu changed the terms. So, there's tape from the IDF entering Syria over the weekend, and so I'm wondering, last thing on this, is there a split in the Israeli government now where the real issue is get the hostages back, do a ceasefire, withdraw from Gaza and Lebanon, and call it a day? That's one camp. And the other camp is, no, we don't care that we killed every leader of Hamas and Hezbollah. We want to take northern Gaza and maybe southern Lebanon. And so we're gonna throw the hostages under the bus. We're not doing any peace deal. We're just going to keep going. That to me is clearly the Netanyahu camp. Is there that other camp? Is there any chance that that camp that says let's wrap this up and get the hostages back wins? I don't even know how they would win.
There is a chance, Cenk, if the hostages, some of them come back, and based on the information that they provide about where they were kept and what conditions they were kept and by whom, if it turns out that it might have been easier for Israel to get the hostages back a few months ago than it has seemed so far, that would be devastating to Netanyahu. It would probably bring down his government, his premiership, because if it does turn out that Netanyahu could have gotten more of these hostages back and took active steps to block it, that would bring down his government. Likewise, Netanyahu is also getting pressure from the right, because there are some people who are even more hardline than him who, for example, with Iran, are disappointed that Netanyahu's military, that the Israeli military didn't go and bomb Iranian nuclear sites and oil facilities. And Netanyahu's position of only attacking some of the missiles and the air defense systems did not make them happy. So in the weirdness of Israeli politics, we have a variety of coalitions that can also essentially gang up together to bring down a government. Netanyahu's getting it from both sides. But I think the threat of from the left and from the center of Netanyahu bypassing opportunities to get the hostages, that's the more serious threat to bring down his government. And look, I have my own sort of criticism of Netanyahu, and I would love to find out if the hostages could somehow get out. Okay, exactly where were they kept? What were the conditions? What were the possibilities? What did the hostages know? The people who were keeping them, what kind of orders were they under? Was it possible to get the hostages back if certain steps had been taken? And if it turns out that it was, that is huge for Israeli society and a huge blow to Netanyahu politically.
Yeah, obviously the Israeli society is seeing something different than we're seeing. So if they were here, I would tell them, mystery is solved. He could have gotten the hostages back. He chose not to. That's super obvious to the entire planet, except Israel, apparently. So if this controversy makes it more obvious to the Israeli people, then they'll have done a great service. All right, everybody check out David on Rebel Headquarters. We got a whole nother hour coming up for you guys, including a potential October surprise. Jeffrey Epstein tapes about Donald Trump. We'll tell you about that when we return. Thank you, David. Now I'm going to do something very different here and read some one-star reviews of the Young Turks on Apple Podcasts. Donnie Franchise said, pretty much it's like listening to a trash compactor. Someone else said, negative, anti-American propaganda. And others said, out of context, misquotes, typical leftists who are afraid to debate, just smear. These two would be perfect for CNN or MSLSD. Well, Donnie, you might have a point, because I feel like a trash compactor right now after taking in all those garbage reviews. But thanks for listening anyway. We are, in fact, unapologetically progressive. And if you're not ready for bold commentary, then we're not the show for you. On the Young Turks, we speak up about the issues that matter, and we want to make positive change happen. And now here's why we actually do the show. Mariel Morales said, found this podcast from the True Crime Podcast, Fruit Loops, and other great progressive podcasts. I've become an instant fan of the Young Turks. Great conversation, great takes, very well composed, factual podcast, very informative. Love to hear that. Zed55 said, it's a joy to experience such awareness and intelligence from fascinating people. And Anna is gorgeous and brilliant. Apparently I'm just fascinating, but I'll take it. Paul for Progress said, news well delivered. Appreciate it. KOOK said, Democrats and Republicans are fair game for TYT. And if Anna or Cenk provide disinformation about anything, they will admit they made a mistake and correct it. We appreciate you noticing that we are honest. To people who actually listen to the substance of the show, thank you. Your listenership supports what we do. Leave a 5-star rating for the Young Turks on Apple Podcasts. Let's take the ratings back from the trolls. Everywhere you look, things are getting more expensive. Here at TYT, we understand this. That's why we're not gonna price gouge you or use inflation as an excuse to raise our prices. A TYT membership is not your typical subscription, but basic membership is still just $4.99. So what do you get for that price? For starters, you're getting exclusive programming, unique, exclusive designs from Shop TYT, access to a members-only chat, giveaways, emojis, and so many other amazing perks. But most importantly, you're helping to make an impact. As a TYT member, you not only help us do the shows every day, but you drive real positive change in the process. In 2017, we helped to start Justice Democrats right here on TYT. That's a group that got 12 progressives elected into Congress. That's amazing, you did that. Your support also funds TYT's very own investigative reporting. Just recently, our reporters exposed the Fellowship Foundation and pressured lawmakers into boycotting that bigoted event. Isn't that amazing? We raised over $30,000 for Jackson, Mississippi, and delivered clean water to thousands of people in need. Our petitions, polls, and community of activists help keep the corruption of Washington in check. That's the impact of what just $4.99 a month from our members can do. And we're just getting started. Positive change doesn't occur overnight, but with your contribution, we can make it happen together. You know that viral video you saw of me? First of all, it's bull. Second of all, they got it from a snippet of the live show. You should check out the live show so you see the full context of everything we say. Weekdays, 6 o'clock Eastern, Young Turks on YouTube or wherever you get TYT.
What we receive from members is the backbone of our movement to drive positive change. We need viewers like you to keep moving forward. Visit tyt.com/team and join our movement today.
So people, leave Pity City, let's get it done.
Back on TYT, Cenk Uygur, Jordan Uhl with you guys. Check out Jordan on Rebel Headquarters. Jordan, before we get started, let me thank all these beautiful people. They donated through tyt.com/2024. If you do that and you give over $100, I'm gonna call you guys eventually. We gotta get through the election, okay? But I've been calling all this time because I wanna appreciate you guys. And I wanna thank you guys personally for being so supportive and wonderful to us and allowing us to do this show. So Chirple, Vegas Andy 13, Dragon Bell 58, Jess Born of Fire, One Horned Rhino, E-Man 6889, Nurse Photographer, and D Willie. Thank you all for either donating or becoming members through tyt.com/2024. You guys are amazing. And then on YouTube, I want to thank these folks who gave memberships. Torjo Dragon, Jesse AF, and Box all gifted 5. That's beautiful. Felix de la Brara and Julia Rose, thank you for joining through the join button. And Patty Hollingsworth, thank you for joining. And especially at the higher levels, you allow us to keep prices low with no extra through inflation because of the beautiful, generous people that join at the higher levels. And you could upgrade through the join button as well. You guys are all awesome. Jordan, let's do more news.
Take a look at this.
So how do you know this? That was close to straight. He is charming. He is able to convince people. It's very much like Clinton. Both Bill and Donald have the ability to go over to a fat, ugly woman, say, "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." So he tells everybody what they want to hear. And then it's charming.
Just days before the election, journalist Michael Wolff released audio that you just heard, and it's exclusive to him, that showed Jeffrey Epstein talking about details and his relationship with Donald Trump, the former president. Wolff, who wrote 3 books about Donald Trump's first term in office, said the audio tapes were, to his recollection, recorded in 2017 while discussing a potential Epstein biography. He began releasing the recordings last Thursday after Stacey Williams came forward to discuss the abuse that she had endured at the hands of Donald Trump. Wolff says the excerpt is a mere fraction of some 100 hours of Epstein talking about the inner workings of the Trump White House and about his long-standing deep relationship with Donald Trump that he claims to have. Speaking on the podcast, Wolff said of Trump and Epstein, "Here are these 2 guys, both driven by a need to do anything they wanted with women, dominance and submission and entertainment. And one of them ends up in the darkest prison in the country and the other in the White House." As the Daily Beast puts it, Epstein painted a complicated portrait of Trump on these recordings, calling him charming and a good salesman, but also a user and a serial cheat. Take a look.
So just tell me about his intelligence. With respect to real estate deals, he's brilliant. He's a salesman. He knows real estate really well. Anything else but that, he knows nothing. So the idea that he is a bad, dirty business, he's a construction person in New York City, an electrician, in the county. have no idea what they're thinking. But he's a horrible human being. In Jeffrey's book, he does nasty things to his best friends' wives. Anyone who first tries to gain your trust and then uses it to do bad things. That's how it goes.
Now, on one occasion, Epstein alleged Trump took a woman to what he called the Egyptian room in an Atlantic City casino. Epstein alleged he came out afterward and said, "It was great. It was great. The only thing I really like to do is blank the wives of my best friends. That is just the best." Additionally, Epstein alleged Trump had very detailed and elaborate schemes to get his friends' wives to sleep with him. He would call the men into his Trump Tower office to ask them about their sex lives and offer them sex with beauty pageant contestants, the pedophile said. He would do this while the wives were, unbeknownst to their husbands, listening on speakerphone so that he could then seduce the wives on the basis their husbands had betrayed them, Epstein claimed. Epstein then uses Wolf and his wife Victoria as an example to describe how Trump goes about with this ploy. Take a look.
Donald's office, as you know, he made that call. He used to be on the phone with that fake PR person. I also found it funny. I was sitting there listening to the guys from the Post talk, and Donald would say, he's a great guy. I loved working with him. And I sit there going, this is just amazing. And he'd say, Michael, come on, let's go to the office. And he'd say, tell me, what's it like in there? He'd say, you like having sex with your wife? How often do you? He'd say, it's great. Seriously, Michael, how often do we have sex? Don't you want to? You and I can go upstairs, or tomorrow come over. There's this girl's coming in from Los Angeles, part of the Hawaiian Tropic contest. So come over 3 o'clock. You're going to have a great time. I promise you, Michael, it's just me and you. You're going to have a great time. Be up here at 3 o'clock. We can go upstairs. The whole time, Victoria's been on the phone, listening. He's setting it up. Because he wants a story.
Now, Cenk, there is more recordings that we're going to get into, but I want to bring you in here. I mean, what do you make of this? Is there any part of you that even doubts what Epstein is saying? Should we proceed with caution here?
Yeah, I don't doubt what Epstein's saying there, if that's Epstein. There is a portion of me that doubts the story overall. So Michael Wolff is not proven perfectly reliable in the past. He was considered reliable for a long time, but the last couple of things he did, there were some errors in there that were pretty bad. So I say grain of salt on this one. On top of that, there's this weird thing that you mentioned there, where he says he has hundreds of hours of Epstein talking about Donald Trump's White House, and there's just a snippet of it. You never went through those hundreds of hours? You don't have more than just a snippet? And you just did this at the last second before the election? You didn't take the last 4 years to go through that? You didn't go through that earlier? You didn't go through that when Epstein died in prison? So that's super weird. And so I'm just acknowledging that. But the bottom line is, Jordan, it doesn't really matter, because the 2 biggest parts of the story are already public knowledge. One is his close friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. In this tapes, he says, Donald and him were the closest friends for 10 years. But I'm going to read to you the quote that I've read many times now, in case there's somebody in the audience that hasn't seen it, because a lot of people don't know. Donald Trump said back in 2002 that they were really, really good friends. And this is, so you don't need these tapes to know this. Trump said at the time, quote, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." So he knew, everybody knew Trump and him were great friends. Trump even knew that he liked young girls. And like an idiot, admitted it, because that's what he always does. So the second thing we got out of these tapes that was already public knowledge too, is how Donald Trump gains your confidence and then betrays you. Well, that's what a con man does. It's short for confidence man. They gain your confidence and then they use it to screw you over for their own benefit. The story of how he did that with his friends, with the trick on the phone, he gets the wife on the phone, on the speakerphone. The guy doesn't know it. He brings his friend in, talks about having sex with girls. The wife is outraged, and then he tries to sleep with the wife. That story was also known earlier, reported earlier. And so that's who he is. And look, guys, if one of your best friends did that move on you, what would you think of him? I mean, that's the worst guy in the world, right? Like the skeeviest, cheesiest piece of crap you've ever seen. You think he's your friend, a really, really good friend, and meanwhile, he tries to get you to have an affair which you weren't inclined to have, and so that he could have sex with your wife. And that's really a pretty good analogy for how he thinks of America. And especially MAGA. MAGA, he's gonna gain your confidence and then betray you for his own purposes. Yeah, that's Trump 101. So at the end of the day, even though it sounds explosive and it's an October surprise and it's right before the election, it's not much new information, Jordan.
Yeah, that was my take when this stuff first started to come out. First, and to your point, I don't think we should discount that. Like, why is he sitting on this for so long? If he recorded it in 2017, I hate that. People like hold on to stuff for a personal project later. You know, with all respect to Bob Woodward for his legacy and his work, like holding on to things about Trump's behavior during COVID or Trump's decisions that had real tangible harm until later when he was going to publish his book. I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me. A lot of reporters will justify it because that's how they make money on the side and they need it. Reporters aren't appreciated, of course. It's a dying industry. But when it's in the public interest, it starts to rub me the wrong way. So, like I said, this isn't the only thing. He also revealed information to Wolf that allegedly revealed the inner workings of the Trump White House. Take a look.
His people fight each other.
Right.
And then have outsiders. He sort of poisons the well outside. He will tell 10 people Bannon's a scumbag and Priest is not doing a good job and Kelly has a big mouth. And what do you think? Jamie Dimon says you're a problem and I shouldn't keep you. And I spoke to Carl Icahn, and Carl thinks I need a new spokesperson. So Kelly, even though I hired Kellyanne's husband, Kellyanne is just too much of a wild card. And then he tells Bannon, you know, I really want to keep you, but Kellyanne hates you.
According to the Daily Beast, Wolf also stated Thursday that Epstein showed him photos of Trump with topless young women sitting in his lap. Unsurprisingly, the Trump campaign rejected all claims, calling Wolf disgraced and lacking morals. Quote, he waited until days before the election to make outlandish false smears, all in an effort to engage in blatant election interference on behalf of Kamala Harris. He's a failed journalist that is resorting to lying for attention. Cenk, I mean, you mentioned earlier, Michael Wolff has credibility issues. Is he the right person to report this story? I mean, does that help the Trump campaign in this situation?
Yeah, but again, there's absolutely nothing new here. So yeah, so if this is a story that the Trump camp says you should ignore, that's normally I'd say get out of here. The Trump camp's full of crap on everything, but not this one. I get it. Is it problematic to do it a couple of days before the election? Of course. Is it done a couple of days before the election on purpose? Of course. Is it Michael Wolff trying to get attention? Yes, all those things. But look at that so-called revelation there about how Trump gets his own team to fight each other and talks crap behind the scenes about each one of them to each other and gets them to hate each other. Yeah, that's another thing that was already known. And that is why Donald Trump is the world's worst manager. If you've ever been a manager, I can't think of anything more unproductive and counterproductive. That is so monumentally dumb to do that. That's why everyone was constantly fighting inside the White House. Everyone was constantly leaking to try to gain an advantage. He's a moron of epic proportions. He's a terrible guy and he's a moron. but we already knew that. So the word Epstein has big cachet here, and that's why a lot of people are paying attention to the story. I get it, and I wanted to make sure you guys heard the tapes for yourselves. But at the end of the day, I don't think this moves things very much. It's just, but like the only thing I'll say is the same thing I've said throughout. The QAnon guys, the MAGA guys, everybody that was so mad about Epstein, you're right to be that mad. He's one of the worst, child molesters in this country. But it never bothered you that him and Donald Trump were the closest friends, that Trump knew that he was having sex with younger women. And when his co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell was caught and in prison, Donald Trump was president, and they said, what do you think about it? She said, I like her. I wish her well. That's after Epstein had already killed himself. And then we catch his co-conspirator and he's like, I wish her well. Who says that? So if you don't know that him and Epstein were friends and they did things with women together, you're just lying to yourself. That was already public knowledge. That doesn't mean that Trump did something with younger women. We don't know that, okay? But we do know that they partied together and did, questionable things with women overall. None of that is news here. So if you didn't know, now you know. But otherwise, not as big a news story as Michael Wolff would like to hype.
Yeah, and there's one other thing. So you're talking about the turmoil and the culture within the Trump orbit, the campaign, the White House. I would encourage people to read Tim Alberta's piece in the Atlantic from this weekend. Not only is that unsurprisingly still the way that Trump develops a culture on his campaign, it is hysterical. It is one of the funniest reads I've sat down with in a while, and it's so bad right now on that campaign that many people who work on the campaign are refusing to join the potential transition team, or if he wins, the Trump White House. It is so unbelievably toxic, and it's a very, very enjoyable read.
All right, we'll leave it right there. When we come back, Donald Trump is promising us more madness. Maybe get rid of some vaccines. Well, what if you want the vaccine? All right, we'll explain it when we return.
He's a psycho.
Check out Election Day at noon Eastern tomorrow. Starts here, goes for about 14, 15 hours. And make sure you're participating in both the state competitions and the contests we're going to have, and sign the Populist Pledge if you can. Participating in the state competitions and a watch party that we're having for some of our viewers. That's tyt.com/hope. tyt.com/hope. Everybody come to tyt.com tomorrow, starting at noon Eastern, for all the festivities and all the information you need for the election. The Green Family 77 said, I would like Kamala to win, but I don't know anyone voting for her. I'm worried that Trump is going to clean up. Democrats underestimate that people think Trump economy will be so much better than Kamala's. So look, that goes to one of the many reasons why I keep saying I have no idea what's going to happen, because Trump does do better with the economy. There is this mythology that the economy was just, that everything was amazing under Trump. The economy was amazing. Everything was sunny. No, we lived through a lot of stress back in those days. But people do believe that, and the polling shows that. So that's another reason we're not sure. Let's continue with YouTube members. The Common Dragon says, taking bets, what time is Trump going to start claiming he has already won the election? I'll put down the bet now. He's probably claiming it today as we speak. They don't really care about the voting that much. Kosovo 87 says, I'm from Iowa. Tomorrow before work, I'm voting for Harris-Walz, and so is my whole family. All right, there you go. Bruce City Mike says, in the last 2 days, I took photos in my city of Latinos for Harris, Teamsters for Harris on their headquarters, Unions for Harris, Blacks for Harris, Teachers for Harris, and Vets for Harris signs. So now that's the opposite of the earlier member writing in from their area. So in different areas, you're seeing very different enthusiasm, voter turnout, and what people are talking about in the community. Trisha Briggs writes in, I'm really trying to be hopeful while at the same time bracing for the possible impact. I'll be tuned in all day tomorrow. Thank you, TYT. Thank you, Trisha. So go to Twitch. Civic Folly 86 says, it's a shame I can't convert to Christianity or something else. Thanks, Mom, but Netanyahu is making us Jews look bad. No, brother, don't do that. Okay, so I know Netanyahu is terrible. You know Netanyahu is terrible. This current Israeli government is atrocious. But be proud of who you are, okay? And be proud that you've gotten past whatever we grew up with. I'm proud that I got past Turkish propaganda to see things a little bit more clearly. And Jewish culture is a beautiful culture. You should be super proud that you're from that. We'll fix, all of us together, hopefully we'll get Israel back on the right track and get the Palestinians freedom. I'm Just Me wrote in, David, we love you anyway and we don't want your humiliation, but we love your humility, referring to David Schuster's prediction and his claim that he will eat the paper that his prediction's on if Kamala Harris loses. Phototech TV, TTV says, another thing you have to look at too, Cenk, is Gen Z. They're coming out in huge numbers too, about 20% nationally since the last presidential election. I hear you. That demographic is a little bit tighter than it used to be. Dave Schmidt 311, thank you for gifting a sub. Rain Swept Flower said, oh my God, my nerves are killing. You speak for the whole country. We'll be back.
I enjoy his message. I'm not one of those people that believes everything he says. However, he puts an interesting spin on turning the frogs gay, for example.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Jordan with you guys, and the Comet Dragon, who gifted 10 Young Turks memberships on YouTube. You guys are awesome. Go ahead, Jordan.
At a campaign stop in Michigan this weekend, Donald Trump was pressed on whether Robert F. Kennedy Jr., if tapped to oversee health policy in the event of a Trump win on Tuesday, would influence vaccine policy in the United States. Trump suggested it's on the table. Take a look.
President Trump, you said last night he would essentially let Robert F. Kennedy Jr. do whatever he wants with health care. What
He's going to have a big role with health care.
HHS, maybe?
We just left. In fact, I think he might be here.
He's right here.
Where is he?
Will he run
You're comfortable
HHS?
with his views on vaccines, Mr. President?
We'll be talking about a lot of things, but he's going to have a big role in health care, very big role.
Is it HHS, maybe?
He knows it better than anybody. Some views that I happen to agree with very strongly, and I have for a long time. For years, you and I would, we'll be seeing it as a...
What about his views on vaccine and maybe a position of HHS?
All of these things we'll be talking about.
All those things will be talked about. Now, as a reminder, RFK Jr. has long spread conspiracies and falsehoods about vaccines and other public health matters. He has, for example, frequently claimed that vaccines are linked to autism, even though studies have debunked that theory for decades. And that wasn't the only thing that Trump and Kennedy hinted at this weekend regarding RFK's potential role. On Saturday, RFK posted on X that on January 20th, the Trump White House will advise all U.S. water systems to remove fluoride from public water. Fluoride is an industrial waste associated with arthritis, bone fractures, bone cancer, IQ loss, neurodevelopmental disorders, and thyroid disease. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump want to make America healthy again. And in that tweet, he also linked to a site that features outlandish health claims, conspiracy theories like HIV-like viruses are in vaccines, and widely debunked medical claims. The push to remove fluoride from water grew during COVID as people adopted more anti-science and conspiratorial views. Major public health groups, including the American Dental Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, support the use of fluoridated water. All cite studies that show it reduces tooth decay by 25%. Trump has also said RFK Jr. is going to work on health and women's health, quote, which has many people concerned because of RFK's changing stances on abortion. When he was running, he at one point or another advocated for a federal ban at 15 weeks, limits at fetal viability, no limits even at full term. And then when asked what his stance was by the Washington Post in February, he said, "I don't know. You tell me. What should I be doing?" You know, Jeng, I think the abortion thing is like a different part of is a different issue. I don't think he would be working on that directly. I think it's important that he could be working on women's health. We should be concerned by that. But I think most notably, vaccines and fluoride. Those are two things I really don't want RFK Jr. shaping the policy in the United States. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm concerned about a lot of things. So are some vaccines going to be taken away? Well, what if we want them? What happened to freedom? Okay, so let's assume that that they're not going to be taken away, but then this whole idea that vaccines might cause autism, well, that's been debunked by every scientific study. The idea that fluoride in the water causes those things, also debunked by every scientific study. So look, this is a giant problem with Bobby Kennedy Jr., and I've said it to his face when he was here, which is, so you want us to believe that you are more correct than almost every scientist that has looked at these issues. It's too big an ask. It's too crazy an ask. And what if you're wrong and 99% of the scientists are correct? And we take away a vaccine or we don't make it mandatory, and a polio outbreak happens, as has happened throughout the world, and in some places that Kennedy went to and had anti-vaccine conversations in the Pacific Islands. So, and I remember there was a conspiracy theory in Pakistan once about how America was injecting poison into the vaccines and the West was, so don't take them. And then a giant polio polio outbreak happened. And then they were begging for the vaccines after that. Well, you can't bring it back in if you've already caused that kind of damage. So the idea of ignoring all the scientists and all the doctors when Trump gets back in sounds like an absolutely disastrous idea. So if you want to question some of the science, you want to question, hey, was that outbreak of COVID really natural, or was it gain of function? Experiments that were happening in Wuhan, let's have a conversation. Let's be open. Let's have an open debate about it, because I don't want to bury any questions and not platform it, et cetera, not have discussions. But what the government does has real ramifications on people's lives. So I don't want to go to extremes with no conversation at all. Boom, Trump wins, Kennedy gets appointed to one of these important roles. Next thing you know, the fluoride's gone, some of the vaccines are gone, and you can't undo the damage. So look, the only thing, Jordan, that is a little bit mitigating here is that Donald Trump's an enormous liar. So it's possible that after he wins, he just says, hey, Bobby, I was just messing with you. Get out of here. I'm not going to give you anything.
Yeah, no one should take Donald Trump at his word. Not somebody I would ever trust to follow through on their end of a deal. I think he sees, or he did see that RFK was pulling votes from him, and he probably offered him something that he's under no real obligation, and RFK has no leverage to enforce or use for Trump to follow through. There's a couple things here, though, that are really concerning. RFK has a decent, on some things, past. There are some issues with his environmental stances and policies. There are some things that are red flags about his investments, that kind of stuff. But in general, I think he means well on the environment. And some things on health, pesticides, we should look into what some of these big companies like Monsanto or Bayer, some of these companies that have knowingly distributed products that cause cancer, or especially with like Roundup. Totally fine. And there are people who understand that is bad, and the government turned a blind eye to that kind of stuff because of corporate influence. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they see that and then continue following these people who rightfully point out this is wrong and then lead them astray. And there's been this huge boom in the wellness sector of people who started with hey, we should get this stuff out of the food, or we should only eat organic food, or we shouldn't use pesticides on our food. Okay. And then they continue leading them down. And then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we should get fluoride out of the water. What are we doing here? It's for somebody to mislead people, and unfortunately for so many people to look up to him as a leader on this front is really, really alarming. I don't think he will follow through. And like when we talked about him last week, I don't think he would survive Senate confirmation because he's such a crank. But just the possibility that he could be interim and maybe have some bureaucratic power to influence decisions, even if temporarily, is really alarming because I don't trust him to make responsible health decisions.
Yeah, last thing here. I've seen people go down that rabbit hole where they start out with, hey, I'm concerned about the environment, concerned about pesticides, super legitimate concerns, get into GMOs, you go a little bit further down the rabbit hole. So, and my answer is, guys, balance and facts matter. So if you got something that's that the companies are doing wrong, we're going to join you on that 100%, right? But the science has got to back it up. But once they realize that the government's been lying or the companies have been lying to them, then unfortunately people then think, okay, then everything's a lie. So I'm not believing a single scientist or a single doctor ever again. No. Not all scientists and doctors are lying. In fact, the overwhelming majority of them are telling the truth. The ones to look out for are the scientists paid by those particular companies to put out false reports and to have their crooks in government enforce those things because they're taking campaign contributions. So if you want to regulate on the wrongdoing, you've come to the right place. But if you say that's why we should never believe scientists and instead believe Bobby Kennedy Jr. and only go in that direction, no, that is not the right approach. And finally, Trump doesn't really care about Senate confirmations. At the end of his term, he was just saying, I don't care, acting secretary. I'll put whoever I like in there, and I don't give a goddamn about your constitutional requirement about Senate confirmation. So he could make somebody acting secretary for 4 straight years. But we have no idea what Trump's going to do. Trump doesn't know what he's going to do. It depends on what he thinks is to his advantage the minute before he makes the decision. So we could all be screwed and be headed down this rabbit hole together as a country, or he might not do that at all. No one knows. But it's a risk I don't want to take. All right. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, more news about the election, more insanity from right wing, and more crying from Donald Trump, all when we return. So let's go to our member section where D. Willie, thank you for becoming a member through tyt.com/2024. I'm going to butcher this name, but and Mo Mahotra Green. Yeah, that was awful. Thank you for becoming a member. We love you. Most people can't pronounce my name either. Anyways, Beck 271 says white women and Gen Z have been underestimated by the polls, and black women have been ignored by the polls. These are the unexpected voters for Harris. The corporate media has paid too much attention to old white men in Ohio diners. We're sick of it. So thank you for writing in. Joseph Yoakum writes in, Cenk, older women voters are voting for Harris because Republicans talk about gutting Obamacare and Social Security and Medicare. That's where the buck stops for these women. Well, you might be very right about that. So those are certainly among their concerns. And I think there's a good percentage of women who think, not that guy, and not that guy again. No. And we're not having another woman candidate lose to Donald frickin' Trump. And so I hear them on that, but mainly women going, you took my rights away and I'm pissed. And that I hear 200%. Progressive Pipes Plus says, Cenk, don't forget, we had a member comment, you read about a friend and a friend of hers, I think, who was apolitical and so excited about Harris, she was going to make sure she got to the polls to vote for Harris-Walz. Girl power. You're here. Yabby Marita says, I really hope that having ghouls like Carrie Lake and Mark Robinson on the ballot in Arizona and North Carolina will help push those states into the blue column tomorrow. I'm so ready to move past this weird era of the GOP. Yeah, those terrible candidates will hurt them in those states, so that's a good point, Gabby. Maybe we do have a shot in those states because of that. That's a great hidden factor. Excellent point. Tennessee Hills Dragon says, David has me over here smiling. I'm so excited for him to be proven correct. Hashtag hope. That's because Schuster predicted that Kamala would win easily tomorrow. Urban Hermit said using the press as a human shield about Trump. Good point. Stiff Upper Lip says, so you had the wall. If you had the wall, then why are people apparently coming across so easy? Making sense is not their strong point. Yeah, great point by you. Don't shoot on the goalkeeper says going to protect women whether they like it or not. Doesn't sound great coming from an adjudicated rapist. Yeah, he was found liable for sexual assault. So that is true. We'll be back. All right, back on TYT. Cenk and Jordan with you guys. More news.
On Saturday, Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris made a guest appearance on Saturday Night Live, which has sparked major concerns with the Republican base over the FCC and, quote, equal time rules. Now, we can't show you the clip due to copyright, but Harris made a brief cameo alongside Maya Rudolph during Saturday's cold open. You can see that here. As you can see, Harris played herself as the mirror image of Rudolph's version of her. It's nice to see you, Kamala, Harris told Rudolph with a broad grin she kept throughout the sketch. And I'm just here to remind you, you got this. In sync, the two said supporters need to keep Kamala and carry Anala, declared that they share each other's belief in the promise of America, and delivered the signature live from New York. It's Saturday night. According to the AP, the appearance was only confirmed by Harris's team moments before she went live. The vice president arrived at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in Manhattan, where SNL tapes, shortly after 8 p.m., enough time for a quick rehearsal before the show aired live at 11:30 p.m. It was the final SNL episode before Election Day. She left immediately after the opening segment and told reporters it was fun as she boarded her plane for Michigan. Following the appearance, Republican FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr slammed NBC for the appearance, saying NBC was attempting to give Harris a leg up by not offering Trump or third-party candidates a similar spot. Take a look.
Yeah, look, this appears to be a clear and blatant effort by NBC to evade the requirements of federal law, in particular, the FCC's equal time provision. I mean, look, America's broadcasters have a very special privilege. It's a privilege they were given originally for free, which is access to a public resource, the airwaves. In exchange, they have certain obligations. One of them is an equal time rule. This has been on the books for decades. If you give a candidate for office free airtime, you have to offer a comparable time and program to all other legally qualified candidates.
The FCC's equal time rule. It requires American radio and television broadcast stations to provide equal access to competing political candidates. The rules do not apply to cable channels or other video content, including podcasts or social media. So if Trump were to request equal time from NBC, the broadcaster would have to provide it before the election. Now, Carr also went on a tweet bender, making note of Trump's 2016 guest host spot and how it drew anger back then. In the 2016 cycle, President Obama's FCC chair made clear that the agency would enforce the equal time rule when candidate Trump went on SNL. NBC stations publicly filed equal opportunity notices to ensure that all other qualifying candidates could obtain equal time if they sought it. Stations did the same thing when Clinton appeared on SNL. Carr also made note of SNL head Lorne Michaels saying last month no Trump or Harris cameos would happen due to equal time provisions. Just weeks ago, Lorne Michaels said they would not be bringing any of the candidates on due to election and equal time laws. You can't bring the actual people who are running on because of election laws and the equal time provisions, Michaels said. It's unclear what made Michaels change his mind. However, NBC did file a notice with the FCC and did provide Trump with his equal time. In the notice filed Sunday, NBC said Harris appeared without charge on SNL for 1 minute and 30 seconds. The broadcaster provided Trump airtime Sunday, CNN's Brian Stelter reported, giving the former president an opportunity to directly address viewers during the NASCAR 2024 Cup playoff race. Jank, it seems like much ado about nothing, but still an opportunity for the right to find something to build a grievance around.
Man, they love to cry. All right, so first of all, where does Bernie Sanders go to get billions of dollars in free media coverage that the networks robbed him of? I saw the major party candidates all over those networks in 2016 and 2020, especially in 2016. You know how much time ABC spent on Bernie Sanders in 2015? It was as he was miraculously closing a 40-point lead that Hillary Clinton had. They gave him 7 seconds of airtime in all of 2015, as he's doing one of the most miraculous rises in American politics. So I think these guys are monumentally full of crap. I don't think they ever enforce this to anyone but the major party candidates after they cry and complain. Brendan Carr is a Republican, so all of a sudden he's all in his emotions over it. And how about the third party guys? All right, Jill Stein's in the race. Where's her 2 minutes on NBC? Go ahead. I thought you said it applied to everybody. Where's her 2 minutes? Here's what's going to happen. NBC's going to go, yeah, right, third party candidates. You guys aren't even corporate candidates. And Carr and all the FCC isn't going to say anything about it at all. So this is a giant fluffing of the establishment candidates and giving them more and more free airtime to the detriment of every real populist candidate. And for the Trump guys, about this too. They're crying, oh, election interference, election interference. So how about when you got the SNL appearance in 2016? How come you weren't crying about it then? How come you didn't file any FCC complaints then? How come it wasn't election interference back then? Oh, when it's done on your behalf, you love it. When it's against you, all of a sudden, oh, election interference. And guys, the media is not election interference. Mainstream media has screwed over every progressive candidate that I have ever supported, including myself, including Bernie Sanders. But we didn't say like, oh no, we should actually win. I should be in office. Bernie Sanders should be president. No, mainstream media lying, right-wing media lying, being biased is part of the obstacle course that we have to run through. You don't get to say, hey, I didn't like what the media said, so election interference. That's not election interference. It's ridiculous. Is Donald Trump ever going to stop crying? And the answer is definitely no, because he is a spoiled little baby and all he knows is how to cry.
But also, the SNL thing in 2016, Trump hosted. Hillary just had a cameo during a skit. So, I mean, were they upset that it was unfair to her along the point that you made? Oh, it's election interference now. Trump had an entire episode. She just had a brief cameo. So if they're going by minutes and seconds, which Brendan Carr spent the weekend tweeting about, it has to match even down to the second. I mean, what's the big deal? Where was that then? Why aren't you upset on Hillary's behalf? So it's just kind of ridiculous, especially that he's in this position to influence the FCC. It's just so disingenuous. It doesn't matter. But I did find it funny that the 1 minute that he got was during a NASCAR event. Just like, all right. I mean, look, there's people, I'm sure, good people on all sides who like NASCAR, but are you really finding new voters in a NASCAR event?
Yeah. All right. But NBC put out a statement saying that Chase Oliver will also get 2 minutes in prime time, that he's a libertarian candidate, and Jill Stein will also get 2 minutes. All right. They put out no such statement. And Brendan Carr put out no such statement. The FCC put out no such statement because they're all giant liars. Those people will not get any fair time, equal time. All this is a giant scam. Those networks love establishment candidates and major party candidates like Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So this is a big nothing burger other than Donald Trump's tears creating that burger for you. All right, bonus episode. We're going to talk about the populist revolt. No matter who wins, come sign the pledge with us. Find out what that is, let alone extra stories, including Tucker Carlson. After he was chased by demons, he now thinks that maybe abortions are causing hurricanes. Lunatics for everyone. Come one, come all. All right, hit that join button below or tyt.com/2024.